From the sports betting capital of the world, Las Vegas, it's time for the show you can't afford to miss. The #1 weekly football preview, Wanna Bet. Get ready for valuable information, analysis, winning picks, and betting strategies. Your hosts, SEC gridiron guru Kip Keefer, and award-winning betting expert, writer, and sports editor for the Las Vegas Sun, Kip Keefer. Let's go. Here's everything you need to win big. Wanna Bet.
Hey everybody, welcome to Wanna Bet. I'm Kip Keefer, obviously coming to you from our Birmingham studio instead of our usual location out in Las Vegas. And the reason for that is we have got so much going on right now in football, both college and pro, that we wanted to give you some real up-to-date information. We hope you've enjoyed our initial segments, 14 weeks worth of our Las Vegas discussions on all aspects of football betting and analytics and all the different things that go into it. But this week we're going to focus on the news at hand, which is the end of the college football regular season, which just seems to have started. It's kind of hard to believe that it's already over. This week, of course, the focus turns to conference championship games, the announcement on Sunday of the College Football Playoff Committee of which 4 teams will be going to the playoffs, and then bowl season. So a lot to concentrate on this week as we come to you here on Wanna Bet. We'll have your usual favorite segments. Kip Keefer will be along from Las Vegas, coming up in our second segment with all of his best bets on this weekend's conference championship games. And he's been red hot in the NFL, so we'll have all that great information. Then I will be back for my SEC analysis of the championship game in Mercedes-Benz Stadium coming up later today as the Georgia Bulldogs play the LSU Tigers, the surprise winners of the SEC West. So let's start today by talking about some of the implications of some of these conference matchups. Of course, you've got a lot of drama going on right now around the country at various locations. The biggest one is going to be concentrated in Arlington, Texas today as the Big 12 settles their championship, and it's between the TCU Horned Frogs, which has been the miracle team of destiny all season, if you will. They are undefeated, unbelievably going through the Big 12 schedule with some pretty rigid tests and some miraculous victories, particularly 2 weeks ago against Baylor when they rallied at the very end and kicked a field goal literally as the clock ran out. They ran the team on the field with no timeouts and managed to get the kickoff, and it went through the uprights to keep their perfect season alive. This week, they're in Jerry World in Arlington, Texas, and they will play the Kansas State Wildcats. The Big 12, one of the conferences that's gone to the format of the second best team record-wise and win percentage-wise, gets the berth. They've gotten away from the division concept. So Kansas State, who played earlier in the year at home in Manhattan, Kansas against TCU and had a big lead in that game before Martinez, the quarterback, got hurt. TCU, like they did all season, stormed back and beat the Wildcats. But this is a pretty compelling matchup because for TCU, a team that's never even been in consideration for the playoffs, really, they will stamp their ticket for sure today if they can beat Kansas State down in Dallas. Another matchup that's going to be interesting, we mentioned there's compelling ones all around the country. Another one is in the Big Ten. Michigan, of course, last week going to Columbus, Ohio, shocking the world and just beating up the Buckeyes, who were so highly regarded by so many. Ruined the Heisman chances for C.J. Stroud for a second consecutive year. Michigan winning that game 45-23 as a significant underdog. And the main thing that came out of that game was just the big playability that Michigan showed that they really have not shown all season. They have to stamp their ticket tonight in the Big Ten championship game, but they don't draw a real rigid assignment as they get the Purdue Boilermakers in that contest. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of that goes. We're filming this show a little bit early, so on Friday night, and if you're watching on Channel 21 this morning, well, you already know the outcome. But the USC game in California, actually it's in Las Vegas, Nevada, is where the Pac-12 championship will be held. It'll be USC against Utah. That's a rematch game. Just like the TCU-Kansas State contest, Utah is the only team to beat USC this year, and the Trojans, who have never made it to the playoffs, have a chance to stamp their ticket in that game on Friday night in Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas with a win. And again, if you're watching on Saturday morning, you already know the outcome of that ball game. So that's the drama that's unfolding. Of course, Georgia is playing LSU, and I'll have a complete breakdown on that game in my SEC segment coming up later and give you my best picks for the way to go about wagering on that particular contest. So a lot of things happening. The College Football Playoff Committee will come along on Sunday at noon Eastern. That's 11 o'clock here in the Central Time Zone, and they will be selecting the top 4 teams. The drama is a USC or a TCU loss will almost certainly open the door for some other possibilities. And amazingly, Alabama sitting with 2 losses, although they were just by 1 point and 3 points in 2 of the toughest venues in the country, LSU and Tennessee. Alabama still has a faint heartbeat here if there can be some chaos in these championship games. Same with Ohio State, who's coming off the blowout defeat against Michigan in their last game. Both those teams are back in the discussion. Should the Horned Frogs or the Trojans stumble this weekend? And the committee will have some tough decisions to make. Others are still trying to speak up for the Tennessee Volunteers, who would have the same record as Alabama and a win over the Tide in a head-to-head competition. If that happens, of course, Tennessee has to overcome the stigma of what happened to them 2 weeks ago in Columbia, South Carolina, when their playoff chances took what looks like a fatal bite from the Rattler, Spencer Rattler, the Oklahoma transfer, who just lit it up in that game 2 weeks ago. And then last week did the same thing to Clemson and probably eliminated their playoff hopes. When's the last time a team within 7 days have knocked out 2 major contenders that was a pretty lightly regarded team like South Carolina? So that's the drama coming in the weekend. Beyond that, we are going to have all kinds of information all throughout bowl season, college football playoff season, keep you up to date on everything happening. We hope you've enjoyed our series of betting discussions with Case, and we plan on having phase 2 of that after we get the whole season wrapped up here with all of these big games and big matchups. Exciting time of the year for sure in college football. On the pro side, Case will have his full report. The NFL is really revving into gear. The Kansas City Chiefs continue to roll right along and win week after week. But there's a lot of great storylines in the NFL. The Philadelphia Eagles are the leading team in the National Football Conference, and the Eagles rolled along with a win this week over Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers. So all of those storylines will be developing throughout the month of December and into January. The college football playoffs are on New Year's Eve on December 31st. One of the games will be played in Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. So if Georgia can win over LSU this week, they've already got a win in Mercedes-Benz the first week against highly ranked Oregon. They won that game 49-3. If they beat LSU in this game, chances are they'll be the number 1 seed and right back in Mercedes-Benz for a 3rd straight game at a, quote, neutral field for one team in a season, which I can't remember that ever happening. Georgia would be in Mercedes again for the first round of the playoffs against the number 4 seed, and that could be anybody, including USC, Alabama, Ohio State, and maybe even some other teams. So that's interesting. And then the other game will be in Phoenix, Arizona, where in the Cardinals Stadium out there. And that game out west will feature most certainly Michigan as the host team, the number 2 seed, against whoever finishes number 3, presumably TCU. I want you to stay tuned for our next segment. Case Keefer comes along with his picks on the championship games and the NFL, and then I'll be back to preview LSU Georgia. Stay right where you are. You're watching Wanna Bet right here on Channel 21.
Hey, it's Case Keefer here, back again for another week of my best bets on Wanna Bet. And unfortunately, this week, not going to be a whole lot of the bets, at least in college football. And maybe I shouldn't say unfortunately, because it's more fortunately. This is one of my favorite weeks of the year, and I think it's anyone's favorite week of the year who bets a lot of futures in college football, which, as you've listened to this segment, that's something I do. I think it's probably where my biggest edge is in college football at this time. I think that's where some of the markets are a little bit less sharp, and you can find some good value. That being said, I haven't done great on the show. I think the ones I remember sharing haven't come through, but hopefully you've been following along at LasVegasSun.com, where for the second straight year, I have 5 conference championship futures alive as we head into the championship game. The games, those are Troy 16-1 to win the Sun Belt, North Texas 30-1 to win Conference USA, Fresno State 3-1 to win the Mountain West, USC 3-1 to win the Pac-12, and Toledo at 7-2 to win the MAC. With a bunch of big payouts there's a lot of different ways you can approach this. You have to decide, do you want to arbitrage some of these, lock in a profit by betting the other side? Do you want to let them ride? I kind of get into that a lot this week in my college football column on LasVegasSun.com. In that's half the slate this week, 5 out of 10 games where I already have a position, so I'm not going to get super involved pre-kickoff, or it's really affecting how you look at these games. It's not just straight handicapping when you already have those bets. So I figured maybe this would be a good time to do some process discussion more than picks. If you look back at some of the bets that didn't work out for the show in the end, I know the 2 I shared for sure on here were Cincinnati at plus 260 to win the AAC, and Texas at plus 450 to win the Big 12 in the middle of the year. Those are 2 bets I look back on, and I don't think I really did anything wrong there at all. I think I would make them again if I had the chance, especially Texas in the Big 12. I know they're Texas. They're cloaked in failure. It's always a laughingstock, but plus 450, there's no doubt in my mind that if you ran this college football season 100 times, if there's 100 parallel universes right now, I think Texas is winning probably 60 out of the 100 times in the Big 12 this year. I think they were by far the best team. They just had some inexplicable losses to Oklahoma State and Texas Tech, the only thing that's keeping them out of the Big 12 championship game. I do give TCU credit. That was TCU's probably most impressive performance of the year to me, is when they beat Texas, shut them down. Defensively, they deserved to win that game, but that still would only be 1 loss. I think it's kind of a fluke that Texas isn't in the championship game here. The Cincinnati one, maybe a little bit. I fired a little too quickly, could have let the season play out a little more, because I think I even remember talking on the show about how a big part of my handicap was I just did not think UCF and Houston were the teams that a lot of people expected them to be early in the year. I think that did play out with Houston. UCF, however, though, bounced back. They found some stuff, and that kind of, I think that was like week 3 or 4 when I placed that bet. I didn't really give time for things to develop. Tulane, a team I've been high on so many years, I wish I could have seen them coming. But that being said, Cincinnati, has a lead against UCF. They let a 2-minute drive to lose that game, and then last week they have a late lead against Tulane, just barely lose at the end without their starting quarterback Ben Bryant. Not to be revisionist here, because I thought they'd be fine without Ben Bryant. I think the biggest recruit in program history, Evan Prater, is behind him and got the start there, but he was just not ready yet. He had a really rough game, and you kind of saw why Bryant was in there, who's not exciting. You kind of see why the coaching staff hadn't turned to Prater yet. So I have to swallow hard on those 2 losses, but happy to have all those other positions. Once again, I'll plug one more time, LasVegasSun.com, or sign up for the Talking Points newsletter, and you can see kind of how I handled all of those if you're interested. Like I said, that doesn't leave a whole lot of games left, but there is one that I have a pregame side on. I'm going to go to the Big 12 championship, and I am actually going to keep chasing my white whale. I feel like I've been picking against TCU every week on this show and every show I go on, but we're going to do it one more time. I'm taking Kansas State plus the 2.5. Heck, I would take Kansas State on the money line here. The Wildcats led TCU 28-10 in their first matchup at TCU. I was confused. I think on another show earlier this week I said, yeah, I know the game was at Kansas State. Well, it wasn't at Kansas State. It was in Fort Worth. Kansas State was beating up on them, then lose both of their quarterbacks, Adrian Martinez and Will Howard. They're down to a 3rd stringer, and they still just barely lose to TCU. I think this line's kind of disrespectful to Kansas State. I think this is a real coin toss. TCU's gotten better. but I don't know. I've been skeptical of them all year. I feel like a falling off is coming, and I really think Kansas State, at their best, is a little bit better than them, and I think the Wildcats are going to win outright. The record on the year for college football is 21-21-2 on the show, unfortunately. A little bit better online if you go to LasVegasSun.com, but hopefully this can push us over 500. The only play this week I've got Kansas State plus 2.5. Let's go to the NFL, where the record's a little bit better on WannaBet. 2-2 last week again, but 21-16-1 now on the year. First game I'm going to go to, one of the biggest games of the week, 49ers Dolphins. I really like the 49ers. Now looks like you can lay 3.5. When I wrote my column earlier this week, it was all the way up to 4. I still went with San Francisco -4, but if you can get San Francisco -3.5, 4 is a semi-key number, so it's good to get the 3.5. I think this team defensively is vicious, and Miami hasn't seen very many vicious defenses lately. It's really tough going east to west. Body clock-wise, circadian rhythm-wise, if you want to do the research, east to west is a much harder transition than west to east. This is just a tough spot for the Dolphins. I think they're going to get more resistance than usual. So San Francisco -3.5. I cashed on the Raiders last week, and I feel like I've had a really good handle on this team all year, which makes sense. I mean, I'm there all the time. It's home away from home. I cover the team. I guess this is an Alabama show, so interesting aside. Had a conversation with, of course, former Alabama great Josh Jacobs and Birmingham native Amir Abdullah last week, who grew up a big Auburn fan. He's kind of undersized, so of course he went on to start at Nebraska. I don't think Auburn gave him much interest, but we had a conversation about the Iron Bowl, and they both said, I think Alabama squeaks it out, 7 or 10 points. I said, no way. They're winning by at least 21. Of course, the spread was in the back of my mind at that earlier in the week when it was at 21. I didn't say that explicitly, but of course Alabama wins by 22, so I got to needle them a little bit this week. Like, hey, you guys are scoring touchdowns in the NFL, and Josh Jacobs smashing records, but I told you Alabama was going to win by more than that. But anyways, I guess that's just to show I'm around the Raiders so much. I feel like I have a good feeling of what they're going to do. Sometimes it can backfire, but this year I really do feel like I've had a good standing. I think I've only lost 2 of their games, and I like them to beat the Chargers here. I'm going to take Raiders +2 against the Chargers. I thought the Chargers' injuries were going to be a little bit more cleared up this week than it looks like. It looks like Corey Linsley, the center, is going to be out again. Mike Williams might be out. They've got some defensive guys banged up, and I just think the Raiders are kind of in a roll right now. I think this late season resurgence continues. I'm going to go with Las Vegas +2. Final pick, just to get 3 NFL in there. Can't believe I'm doing this because I usually pick against this team, but I'm going with the Giants +2.5, hosting the Commanders. I just think these two teams are pretty even, and I just don't believe this Taylor Heineke thing is going to last. He's thrown the ball to the opponents so many times. He just keeps getting dropped interceptions. They're on a great winning streak. They've come through for us a couple of times, but I think time's running out. So Giants +2, Raiders +2, 49ers +3.5. Stick around for Kip's picks on the SEC Championship next.
Hey everybody, it's Kip Keefer. On all of our shows, we're in the business of picking winners, but selecting the champions of real estate, particularly downtown, well, that's easy. It's Lita D'Imperio and Carrie Smith, the dream team at Realty South. 205-937-2232 is the phone number to call if you want to get in the game of fabulous downtown living.
Hey everybody, Kip Keefer back. It's time to talk about the SEC on Wanna Bet. And this week, kind of an easy assignment, only one game, of course, the SEC Championship, as the Georgia Bulldogs host the surprise winner of the SEC West, the LSU Tigers. Now, if you've been sound asleep for a few weeks or haven't been following the action, you might say, wait a minute, whoa, what happened to Alabama? They were the heavy favorite to get to Atlanta like they always are, but this year even more so, the prohibitive favorite to win the national championship coming into the season. Well, let's put it this way. A funny thing happened to the Tide on the way to Atlanta. They took a trip to Baton Rouge that turned out to be a disaster. Coach Brian Kelly, the first-year head man that came in from Notre Dame to take the reins of the Tigers, audaciously went for a 2-point conversion in the first overtime and scored a touchdown, scored a successful conversion when quarterback Jaden Daniels hit freshman Taylor in the corner of the end zone on a perfectly executed back shoulder pass. It's funny because it was the same play Texas A&M tried to run against Alabama on the last play of the game and were unsuccessful with an inaccurate throw by quarterback Haynes King. LSU pulled it off, and shockingly, the Tigers are the opponent in Atlanta instead of the Crimson Tide. That despite the fact that LSU rides into town off a bad loss to Texas A&M last week down in College Station. Texas A&M had a horrible season, only had one SEC win going into last week. But you could kind of see the trends coming a little bit. We sure did right here on Wanna Bet, and allow us to take just a second to brag. Last week's record on SEC games against the spread, 5-0, a perfect slate. What a great way to wrap up the regular season here on our predictions. We'll have one for you, of course, on this game at the end of this segment. So LSU has 3 losses on the year, 2 in the SEC. That stunner to Texas A&M last week, and also an earlier blowout defeat at home against Tennessee. They also, as you recall, lost their opening game to non-conference foe Florida State. That game played at the Louisiana Superdome in New Orleans. So the Tigers, 3 losses, a big underdog against Georgia. I think people would be surprised, as we mentioned, Alabama almost annually stamps their ticket to this game, and it's almost a given going into the year. But it's surprisingly, Georgia and LSU have matched up in the SEC championship game 4 times previously. This will be number 5 in the last 20 years. The first time was 2003. LSU beat Georgia and went on to win the national championship a couple of weeks later against Oklahoma. The coach for LSU that day, fittingly, a guy you might recognize, Nick Saban, was at the controls in that game over Mark Richt. Richt would get revenge just 2 years later. Saban had already departed for the Miami Dolphins, but Georgia knocked off LSU in the 2005 SEC championship game handily. And the next time they met, it was in 2011, and that was the Honey Badger show. Tyrann Mathieu, who's still starring in the NFL, just took over that game. Georgia had a 10-0 lead just before the half. Mathieu brought a punt back for a touchdown that made it 10-7, and LSU just completely dominated the second half of that ball game to beat Georgia 37-10. And in most recent years, in 2019, the Joe Burrow Express with Jamar Chase and all of the other great players that were on the field for LSU, for Coach Ed Orgeron, they beat Georgia in the first ever game in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium for the SEC Championship, on their way to a national championship romp that year. So LSU has a sporty 3-1 record against Georgia in SEC championship matchups, but they've never come in a 16-point underdog before. That's a new wrinkle to this particular game, and Georgia is carrying all the expectations with the number 1 ranking and a perfect season the last 2 years, defending their national championship, and are expected to roll over the Tigers. And there's really a lot of things to talk about in this game as far as the keys to the game. One is the health of quarterback Jaden Daniels. He has been wearing a walking boot at times this week, although as alleged to have been a full-scale participant in LSU practices all week. He got banged up at the end of the Texas A&M game, and that's critical for any team to have their starting quarterback, but for LSU, it's beyond critical. It is absolutely essential. Daniel is about 80% of the LSU offense, throwing and particularly taking off and running the football. That's been their most effective weapon this year, and how they've stayed and actually won a great deal of their games. Remember the Alabama game we talked about a moment ago? Jaden Daniels had run wild the entire game, got to overtime. Alabama methodically went down and pounded in a touchdown and kicked the extra point to take the lead in overtime. On the very first play from scrimmage, Jaden Daniel took off around the end on a rollout and made a beeline to the end zone and scored a one-play 25-yard run in overtime before the now infamous 2-point play that sent LSU to the West Division Championship. So Daniel is just a key guy in terms of his running ability for this LSU offense to work. If you watch the game earlier this year when they went to Arkansas the week after that Alabama game, Jaden Daniel was completely bottled up by the Razorback defense, who employed a real interesting system of basically spying with both outside linebackers whichever direction Daniel went. That became the responsibility of those linebackers, and they really bottled him up, got a lot of pressure, had 6 sacks in that game. That's the key, keeping him in the pocket, not allowing him to just pull the ball down and run. And I'm sure the Georgia defense is going to have a prime plan to make that happen with their athletic outside linebackers. I'm sure they saw the blueprint of Arkansas showing how to do that. And also, he was limited last week in the Texas A&M game, who also did an effective job of keeping him from taking off and running. So his health is a big key. The other situation here is LSU has a pretty good running game with Williams and Emery, but the Georgia defense has just been locked down for 2 seasons now of not allowing other teams to run the football, and we expect more of the same this week. It looks like a mismatch. It's an awfully big spread, but the Georgia Bulldogs are the team to beat and are on a roll. This team clocks in and does its job every single week. LSU doesn't have the personnel, and this is a new experience for a new coaching staff at the helm and a bunch of young players that have overachieved this year. I think Georgia wins the game handily in Atlanta and covers the big spread. That's the SEC report for this week. Georgia LSU for all the marbles. Georgia assumed to be a playoff team regardless of the outcome, but will lock up the number 1 spot if they can come out on top on the scoreboard in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Thanks, everybody, for watching and listening all season long to Want to Bet. We will be with you throughout the college bowl season, the playoffs, and all the way up to the Super Bowl in the NFL. Have a great week, everybody. I hope all of your teams are successful and win big.